Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. We've discussed several shows from the legendary Baker's Dozen on attendance bias, but today is the first episode where we talk about the Baker's Dozen's little brother, a show from Phish's 7-show run in the summer of 2023, the mini Baker's Dozen, if you will. Today's guest is Lucas Jordan, who came on the podcast to talk about his experience at Madison Square Garden on August 1st, 2023, the 4th show of that 7-show residency. Now, it's a bit unfair to mention this show in the same breath as the Baker's Dozen, especially since Lucas wasn't a big Phish fan back in 2017. In the beginning of our conversation, it was hard to shake the comparisons, though. As we went on, it's clear that the 2023 residency could stand on its own. This wasn't Lucas's first Phish show, but it was the one where he truly became absorbed in the impact the live scene can have on a fan. It penetrated his sense of what's possible at a live concert. But you know what? It's Lucas's story to tell. So let's join him to talk about Chicago venues, the rarity of Timber Ho, and who's got the best voice in the band as we discuss August 1st, 2023 at MSG. Lucas, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here to revisit a show that is in our recent past, but it also feels like a long time ago. That show is August 1st, 2023, which was smack dab in the middle of Phish's 7-show residency at Madison Square Garden last summer. Can't wait to talk about it. I was there. You were there. There's a lot to go over. But before we get there, let's talk about you as a fan, Lucas, with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Lucas, when was your first Phish show, and what do you remember from it?
My first Phish show was August 12th, 2022, Alpine Valley Music Theater in East Troy, Wisconsin. I was kind of late to the Phish game, but I hopped on the train that summer because a lot of people just told me, hey, if you're not really getting it, just go see them live and maybe it'll click. And it definitely did with that show. And what I remember from that show specifically was the first set, opening with Fuego, and then I was just like in awe for that entire first set. And then from that first set, I was pretty much hooked. And I was on the lawn. I love being on the lawn at Alpine. And it was just such a great vibe up on that lawn during that run that weekend. So seeing them at my home venue a couple years ago was really great.
So if you're new to the Phish game in the way that you put it, what got you there? Because I'm always trying to get a grip on where Phish's fan base is as a whole. I've been into Phish since I was 15 years old. People of my age always say, oh, they're getting older. The fan base is getting older. That's why there's so many different tiers of camping, for example, at Mondegreen. That's why they're offering the Mexico packages, because their fan base is kind of in a more lucrative space than we were when we were 19 years old. So to hear someone get into them recently, because I'm always hearing of people who are just getting into Phish too, that they're still picking up new fans, that fascinates me. So what got you into the groove? What got you into Phish?
So the first thing that ever happened was way back when I was in high school. This would have been 2009, I believe, 2010, actually more. I would have been a sophomore, freshman in high school. And I was really into Dave Matthews Band, and I'm still into Dave Matthews Band to this day. I've loved Dave Matthews Band for 16, 17 years now. So it's kind of like my intro to the jam scene, even though they're not as much of a jam band anymore. But that was kind of my intro. And then I had a few friends that were into Phish, and then I listened to the Joy album when I was in high school, and they had just released it. And I liked it overall. Like, oh, this is good. This is fun, simple rock. And I just enjoyed it. And then I went back to their older catalog, and I didn't vibe with it as much. I was very into like pop punk at the time, like Blink-182 and Green Day and all those groups. So I was like, no, thank you. And then I kind of went away from Phish for a very long time. And then when I got way back, like I got super back into Dave Matthews Band. Not that I ever got out of it, but I became like re-obsessed a couple years ago. And then I saw that Phish was doing a run at Alpine Valley. And I asked a friend, I was like, should I just go? Do I just need to experience it? Even if I don't love it, should I just go anyway? He's like, yeah, just go. He's like, I'll be there. I'll meet you on the lawn. We'll have a good time. And I was like, okay, cool. So I got my 3-day lawn pass and I went, and that's what completely changed it. Was just going to a live show finally after years of it, knowing who they were and enjoying the Joy album when I was a kid, but I never really liked any of their back catalog. But yeah, now I'm in so deep I can't even swim.
So for your first show, you didn't just go to that first show. You bought a 3-day pass. You were all in right away.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not doing anything that weekend. I'm gonna just try to have a good time. Since I'm a teacher, I have summers off, so I'm able to do a lot of summer tour stuff, which is fun for all the bands I listen to, and just being able to get on that lawn and be able to see them in person. I was just like, okay, I think I get it because the crowd was just nuts. It didn't quite hook me that weekend. Like I wasn't fully in that weekend. I was like, okay, I'm way more interested than I was a week ago, and I want to listen to a lot more. And I just kept listening and listening and listening. And then the show we're talking about today is what hooked me forever. um,
I'm
so
excited
that
to get there. You'll have to let us know when it happened. But before that, when was your most recent show as of today's recording? And what did you think of it?
the most recent show was October 15th, 2023 at the United Center in Chicago. And that was the third of that 3 night run at the United Center. I didn't realize that was the first time they ever played the United Center until after that run was done, which was kind of shocking to me. I think out of the 3 nights, that was probably my like least favorite out of the 3 nights. Like on paper, the first set was a little disappointing in terms of like what I was hoping to hear. The second set had a lot of really cool surprises, like Spanish Moon. And I had fun overall. It wasn't my favorite Phish show I've ever been to, but when I listened back to it, it was probably like the most musically tight night of like the entire weekend when it comes to actual playing. And so like I have mixed feelings about that show. Like I remember being like a little disappointed being there live, but like when I listened back, it sounded really, really good. And that whole weekend was just an absolute blast. That Chicago weekend, like that Friday the 13th night one opener with Carini was so awesome. Like the crowd just went absolutely nuts. I have fond memories of that entire weekend, even if maybe that third show wasn't my most favorite show I've seen of theirs. And actually, something that not Phish related, but I did see a Trey Anastasio show for the first time back in May. I went to the Minneapolis Tab show. Never seen a Tab show before, so that was kind of like my most recent Trey thing, and I'd never seen them before, and that was really fun to see his band live in a really small venue. But being that at that Chicago run was very, very fun overall. That whole weekend was great.
Yeah, so you've mentioned Alpine Valley, and now you're talking about a fall tour show in Chicago at the United Center. So I have to assume you're from Chicago, or at least the Chicagoland area.
I am from Green Bay,
Oh,
Wisconsin.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so I travel to a lot of Midwest shows. Like for example, a week from now, Phish is at Alpine, and I will be there. I'm so excited. But I'll be at all their Midwest shows too. I'll be at St. Louis, I'll be at Deer Creek, and I'll be in Grand Rapids as well for all their Midwest shows.
Oh, wow.
So I try to get around in the Midwest area to see a lot of shows. Same with Goose. I just saw a lot of Goose shows in the Midwest as well.
I was curious about Chicago specifically because it seems like Phish hasn't really settled on an indoor venue in that large city. And it seems that the United Center, from everything I heard, was it too big for the band?
It might have been slightly, but the crowd was very into it. Yeah, it might have been a little big for them, but I think they pulled it off. And I think if they made it a normal thing, I think people would come to United Center every year if they came to that every single year. Because the vibe in the room was really, really fun. The crowd was hot all weekend for everything they did. And it was sold to the point where they were selling behind the stage like they do sometimes.
Oh,
So
wow.
there was enough people to fill the room. But it did feel like a pretty big room for them. Yeah. I think if they kept going back, I think they would keep getting close to selling it out every time they came, just because, like you said, there isn't really a Chicago indoor venue that they frequent. So it would be cool to see them come back there. There was that big rumor of them doing like a Halloween show there this fall, but that has not come to fruition at all, and we're probably not getting any fall shows.
Yeah.
Setting. That's okay.
Well, talking about venues, next question on the lightning round. Can you name one venue that you've seen Phish at already, but you haven't yet returned to, but you would love to see them there again?
Madison Square Garden. As soon as I can get back there, I will be there seeing them again, whether it be a New Year's Eve run or it just be the next time they're there. If I can get lucky enough to get there, it's Madison Square Garden. Like it's like that was just the spot to see them at. Like I could not ask for like a better like first time seeing them indoors show than the one we're talking about today. And I just had such a good time all 4 nights I was there. I loved the venue. I loved the staff. I loved the feel. It felt like a big deal, and it just felt like that was their spot, and like they owned that place. It was really great to be there, and I hope to get back there for a New Year's Eve run, 100%. I'm hoping next year I can get to New Year's Eve because I can't this year, but I would love to get back there as soon as possible.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers. If they play there this year, which I almost am certainly sure that they will, chances are, as long as everyone is healthy, you could kind of book it that New Year's, Madison Square Garden is the place for New Year's.
Exactly
Fingers
right.
crossed. Lucas, what is your most controversial Phish opinion? Something you might say at your next show in a group of people that might raise some eyebrows.
I actually had a hard time thinking of this question, but the one that I've thought about in the last couple of months that I've said to some people, and they're like, "What?" is that I think Mike and Paige are better singers than Trey, and they always have been, and they just don't sing as much. That doesn't mean I don't think Trey is a good singer. I think Trey's a good singer. He's fine. Um, he's Trey, so I don't. It doesn't bother me that he just sounds like a guy, sounds like Trey. But Mike and Paige have like very specific tones to their voice that really feel like they're a very specific kind of singer and that they have a very unique, distinct voice, at least recently, especially Mike. I think recently they just technically sound better than Trey when they sing. It could be the fact that they don't sing as much as Trey, or they just have like their voices have aged a little bit better than Trey's has. But I've always thought that like when I hear Mike and Paige sing, I've always thought that they have better voices and a better tone than Trey does. And a lot of people think that I'm a little crazy for that, but that's okay. So that's kind of my most controversial opinion, is that I get really excited for Mike songs and Paige songs. I don't think Phish is that good of a singer, but he doesn't need to be.
Well, yeah. Although he's become a much better singer than he once was.
I definitely agree with that. I think all of them have. I think all four of them have become better singers than they were in the past. And I think it's because I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I've heard that Trey has gotten like lessons in New York from like an opera or musical theater person to kind of keep his voice up. And I can hear that in his voice. I can hear a lot more freedom in his voice when he sings. I'm a music teacher myself. I teach choir, so I listen to singing a lot. So that's something that I've noticed recently, is that I really enjoy Mike's voice specifically. He had some moments on the New Year's Eve run this past year that were just excellent vocally. I was like, man, he sounds really good when he's singing. And I've always loved Paige's voice. He has such a unique, distinct, bright voice. So yeah, that's kind of my most controversial opinion. I don't really have a ton of controversial opinions. I love most things related to Phish. I guess maybe that is a controversial opinion in and of itself, is I love a lot of their modern output, like their modern albums I think are good to great. So that could be another one. But yeah, I generally like all of Phish's stuff.
It depends who you're talking to, I suppose, whether or not it becomes controversial. I do agree with you with Paige, 1,000%. I think Paige has always been the best singer in the band. I mean, all you have to do is listen to a mid-90s Silent in the Morning, and you are almost fooled into thinking you're listening to a real singer, as opposed to Trey, who is singing, but you all know what I mean. Can I ask you, though, with Mike, what song or performance would you recommend to convince me that he might be a better singer than Trey? Where does he shine?
I think recently he has shined on Funky Bitch a lot. He just kind of gives it in that song. And I think his one from the New Year's run this past year, I specifically remember because I watched the streams from those shows, all four of them. And when he said, I was texting my friend when he was singing, and we were both like, Mike sounds really good. There are just some specific songs where it's like he is just completely on. His voice has gotten a little more powerful, and his voice has gotten a little more, I don't know, full. Like back in the 90s, like when I listen to old 90s stuff, I don't want to say he has a timid voice, because it wasn't timid. It was just a little more light toned than Trey's and Paige's. Paige's is very in your face. Trey is very kind of medium toned, but Mike always had kind of a lighter voice, but recently he's kind of just given it, and he has a lot more fullness to his voice. So I would say if you listen to the Funky Bitch from New Year's Eve this past year, you might think that he's a really good singer.
Duly noted. To wrap it up, Lucas, I know you've been to a smattering of shows, but I imagine at least 3 shows on the lawn at Alpine Valley, plus a bunch indoors at the United Center. What is the weirdest thing you've seen at a Phish show? I have to imagine on the Alpine Valley lawn, from what I've heard, there were some weird things going on.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, so if I talk about the Alpine Valley lawn, I have one specific thing that wasn't quite like the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Well, tell us both. Tell us what you got.
Yeah, I'll tell you both. There's one thing about Alpine I'll say is oh God, was that first or second night? I can't remember. It was either first or second night that I was on the lawn. There was a guy walking around the lawn, and he had this young, I don't want to say young, he had been like a college age kid with him, early 20s. And they were like trying to give people like mushrooms, and it was like in pill form. And I know that because the kid walked by me at one point, and just like tossed a baggie at me that was like sealed and then just kept walking. And I looked down, I was like, what did he just throw at me? Because it was dark at that point, so I couldn't see. I was like, what did he just throw at me? And I picked it up, and I was like, oh my God, these are mushrooms. And there was like a business card in them. And And when I got back to my hotel that night, I looked at their business card and I went to their Instagram and I messaged them. And I was like, what is in this? Because you just like gave this to me. So they were like going around the lawn, like trying to pass out stuff. And there was a guy that obviously he was, well, I don't want to say obviously, but he was someone that was probably trying to be like a sober person on the lawn and not drink or do drugs or whatever. And I looked over and these guys were getting in kind of like a shouting match with each other about the fact that this guy was passing out mushrooms with like a college age kid around the lawn during the show. This guy wasn't a fan of that. So they were like shouting back and forth until finally the guy with the mushrooms just kind of walked away. So nothing that crazy at Alpine for Phish. But
before I'm sorry to cut you off, but before you tell us about the United Center story that I'm sure you have, I gotta tell you, a story like that really, and this is becoming more and more often, this feeling really shows how different a fan base we are than we once were. To be able to message someone instantaneously on a phone and ask them about the thing they gave you that's unlabeled. I remember in 2000, I went to a show at Darien Lake, and it was a real seedy scene in the parking lot before that show. And some guy asked me where to go to the bathroom. I didn't know. I just pointed him in a random direction, and he just pressed an unlabeled, unpackaged little pink pill into my hand. I did not take it, but if it existed back then that I could take out a phone, a mini computer out of my pocket, automatically message this guy with a business card, no less.
I did.
Very professional scum we're talking about now. And ask him, what is this that you gave me? That whole experience could have turned out very differently.
Like, it was just funny because I was like, there's nothing on this. It was just pills. I'm like, I think these are shrooms, but I can't tell. So, and like I said, there was a business card. So I was like, perfect.
That's wacky.
Yeah. I actually went to Darien Lake for the first time last summer. I saw Dave Matthews Band there last summer.
Nice.
And I definitely agree it was kind of a seedy venue. And I didn't love that venue. It was okay. It wasn't bad.
What happened at the United Center?
The other story, this is definitely the crazier story of the two. And I remember there being talk about this online like the day after it happened. But there was a story about a guy that was running around the United Center like lobby and hallway areas that was like bleeding and like screaming. And I saw this guy because I went to the bathroom.
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a rumor floating around that he like gouged his own eyes out and was like running around the venue. But in reality, I'm almost positive he just like was super gaunt. He was just so spun and he had no idea what was happening. And I think he just like smacked his face into a wall really hard and was just bleeding from the head. And it looked like he was like bleeding from the eyes. But yeah, like I didn't see like a close up of the guy. I saw him from a distance and I heard him and I saw people trying to get him, like security following him. And yeah, like he definitely didn't know where he was. And the next day people were going crazy about that on Reddit and Twitter. It was just all over the place. So yeah, I got to see that. A little frightening for a second, but there was a bunch of security that was on him. So I wasn't that nervous about it, but it was just weird to see down the hall, just someone that was screaming. And I think he was shirtless too. I'm almost positive he was shirtless or like in his underwear or something.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me either. So yeah, that was kind of like a weird thing that happened over that weekend that everyone was talking about that I got to witness, unfortunately, I guess, because yeah, it was kind of weird. So yeah, you got to be able to handle your drugs, kid.
When was this show played?
So taking a look back at the summer 2023 tour, it consisted overall of 25 shows, which accounts, by the way, for more than half of the shows in the calendar year. So it's not quite summer or nothing, but we're really digging into this new modern time period where if there is a fall or a spring tour, it's going to be like 9 shows in 3 venues. So if you want to get into the old school experience of traveling with the band or quote touring with the band, summer tour is where it's happening. And this tour of the summer of 2023, to me at least, really conceptualizes that. It really shows on its face the most extreme example. It began with 2 shows at what was at the time the almost brand new Orion Amphitheater in Huntsville, Alabama. I had Bobby Shirley and his son Oliver of the Phish Fry podcast on here to talk about that show, the July 11th one. After that opening pair, there was a 3-night run at Alpharetta, 2 shows at Walnut Creek, 2 shows in Burgettstown. And then we started moving north, a single show at Syracuse, moving east, 2 at the Man in Philly. And then we got to the focus of today's conversation and being a self-centered New Yorker, what I thought was the focus of the tour, a whopping 7 shows at Madison Square Garden, which I always thought of as a mini baker's dozen, although Phish and the fan base as a whole didn't really push it that way. It just kind of felt that way to me personally. I don't know, when you saw the tour release, and I know obviously you were excited for anything you could go to, when you saw this big chunk of shows right in the middle of late July and August in Madison Square Garden, did the Baker's Dozen cross your mind at all? I know you were fairly new to Phish.
Yeah, I actually didn't even know about the Madison Square Garden run until I decided to go to New York for a different reason. Because when they announced the tour, I was hoping for another Alpine run. And then when there wasn't an Alpine run, I didn't really pay attention to what the other dates were because I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm not gonna be able to make it this summer. And this was before I decided to like, okay, I'm gonna be the guy that kind of follows bands around because now I kind of do that. Um, but I used to just not like I would, oh no, I'll just go to the Midwest shows. And that's definitely changed. When I was going to New York for a separate reason, I was going to see a Broadway show that a high school friend of mine was in on a Broadway stage. And when I was looking at other things going on in New York, I was like, oh my gosh, they are at Madison Square Garden the week I am in New York. So I got tickets to one of the shows. I think it was the Friday show or Saturday show. I think the last show of the run. And I realized that I could actually make multiple shows. So that's when I was like, okay, this is going to be it. Like if I'm going to go to see an MSG, this is the time to do it because I'm not going to be able to get to New Year's Eve anytime soon. So being able to see them at like a legendary venue of theirs and everyone's was really cool. So seeing that on their tour itinerary at first, I was like, okay, well, I can't make that. But coming off the Baker's Dozen, what was it, 6 years, 7 years ago now?
Mhm.
It was like yeah, this does feel like a mini kind of Baker's Dozen thing. It feels like the culmination of a tour or the culmination of an event, even though they did still do a Dick's run later that month. But it did feel like kind of like everything was leading up until that MSG run for sure.
Can I ask what show you went to go see your friend in on Broadway?
Sweeney Todd, the Demon
Oh,
Barber
the
of Fleet
Demon
Street.
Barber of Fleet Street, of course.
Sure.
Of course. Was it
Yeah.
good?
It was excellent. Yeah. Josh Groban was in it at the time, and Annalee Ashford, two really good actors and singers. Gaten Mazzarato from Stranger Things. I think I said his last name right. He plays Dustin in Stranger Things. He was in the show. Yeah, and my friend was in the ensemble, so he's in like the chorus ensemble, but he also understudied for a couple of big roles. He understudied for two of the main roles. So yeah, it was cool to go see someone I went to high school with in a major show over in New York.
Of course. So when getting back to Phish, when this tour was announced, personally, I drew a large circle around the whole MSG run. Like you, I'm a teacher, so I had the summer off. And when the Baker's Dozen was played in 2017, I missed 4 shows. I went to 9. And I was determined this time to see everything Phish could do. I didn't want to miss any of it. This is, like we talked about, not the same as the Baker's Dozen, and Phish did not present it that way, but it was still 7 shows, about 15 minutes from my apartment. And on top of that, at the time, I was still chasing Tila, and I would never forgive myself if I skipped, if I went to 5 out of 7 shows or 4 out of 7 shows and they played it during one of those 3. So, the irony being they didn't play it at all during that 7-show run. I waited until New Year's when they did the Gamehenge set. But this 7-show run, my memory of it is that it was very relaxed. It was very chill. Like tickets weren't hard to come by for any of them. There was no buildup like there was at the Baker's Dozen. There were no themes. There was nothing terribly unique show to show. It was just 7 Phish shows. And to move away from the Baker's Dozen, what it reminded me more of, although I wasn't present for them, was when toward the end of their career, when the Grateful Dead would tour in the early 90s, and they would set up shop at Madison Square Garden, usually in September, for like 7 or 9 shows, and then go up to Boston for another 7 shows at Boston Garden. And it kind of the mountain came to Mohammed. Instead of a tour, it became a series of residencies. We're not there yet with Phish, but I have a feeling that's kind of where they are going.
Yeah, and I honestly think that's a good place for them to go. Like especially as they're getting older. And I know Trey has very recently said multiple times that they're all still feeling very healthy and having a really great time and loving life, having a great time at shows. But I think if for longevity's sake, I think that's not a bad place for them to go. I definitely wouldn't complain if they did like a week run at Alpine or anything like that. I would be there for every single show.
My memories of this run are kind of scattered. It seems to kind of blend into one major lump of Phish. There were a lot of good jams. That's not to take away from its quality, but there was also a lot of straight run-throughs of songs, a lot of new material, and stuff that now we could look back and realize that they were kind of doing run-throughs and road testing for songs that were being prepared to be recorded for the Evolve album. So I realized that earlier you said that you kind of saw these shows by accident. Today we're here to talk about the August 1st show. What other shows did you see? Do you remember?
Yeah, I went to go see August 2nd, August 4th, and August 5th of that run.
And what were some of the highlights that you remember after this show or before this show? Because we're going to get into this one pretty close.
A highlight that I remember from not this show we're talking about today was, I can't remember what night it was. I feel like it was the second night, maybe the third night. I can't remember. Whenever they played Mike's song went crazy. That jam was nuts. Like I remember being I remember being there for that. I was behind the stage for every show at various levels for every show I went to. And I specifically remember that Mike's song being like outstanding. And I really loved where that went, going into Sand and Cross-Eyed and all that stuff when they were doing that. So that's like one big standout that sticks out to me in my head. And then I also remember the Loving Cup opener. That was kind of a shock when they opened with Loving Cup on that last night, which was cool.
And why do you have attendance bias toward this particular performance of the several shows that you've already seen?
So like I'll never forget like when I sat down for this performance. I have a vivid memory of like getting into the venue, and I'd never been to Madison Square Garden in my entire life. It was my first time being there ever. I had walked past there a few times and never been inside the venue. But like I'll remember just sitting down, like I got a ticket behind the stage. I was kind of nervous about that. I'd never done it. I had asked people like, hey, there's a really good seat available, like right behind the stage, just one seat that's like 5 rows up, like right behind Trey. Should I get it? Is it worth it going behind the stage? Never done that before. And I got everything from the sound is horrible back there, don't even try, to this is gonna be the best night of your life. You'll never have a better time than sitting behind the stage. Like the spectrum of opinion about sitting behind the stage. So I was really nervous about getting it, but I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go for it and try it. And then when I sat down and looked out like into the crowded pit that was past the stage because it was already packed in there, I was just like, I couldn't believe the view. Like I said to myself, I was like, is this going to be like one of the best nights of my life? And it really was. It's easily a top 3 all-time concert experience for me. Like I have some awesome pictures from right when I sat down behind the stage. I had seen Phish at Alpine Valley, but like this was the night that I truly got it, and like I became obsessed for the rest of my life. I had never experienced like a crowd that was like so rowdy and into a show, and I can't tell if that was just because I was sitting in line with like most of the crowd's sound, like coming right at me the entire show. That could be a part of why it felt so loud in that room. Because I had never been to a show where I was legitimately directly behind the stage. But like the energy coming at me from the crowd was like just insane. I have vivid images from like peak moments of that show in my head, specifically in that first set, and then a couple times in the second set. But it really shifted my music taste and like how I consume live performances. So I just have nothing but good memories about this show. And I think it's one of the best shows they did last year.
For those of you listening, you couldn't see it, but when Lucas was telling his story about trying to crowdsource opinions about whether or not to get a ticket behind the stage, I was just nodding my head yes, as if he were asking me directly in real time about a show tomorrow. Sitting behind the stage at the Garden is such an experience. I don't know about every single time, but it is something that everyone should do at some point. And I could picture the part that you're talking about, the experience, the feeling that when the band starts it up and the lights are pushing out toward the crowd and you're behind the band, you can almost see the sound as reflected back to you from the reaction of the crowd as it's played. And it's like you're involved in the music. You're not in the band, obviously, but it's almost like you're not in the crowd either. It's like being a fly on the wall while still being able to take part in the whole experience.
I definitely agree with that. Like it feels like you're like a part of the performance, especially if you're that close up to the stage. If you're in the first like 10 rows, man, you're just like in there. Like it feels insane. And like watching the lighting rig work, like watching Chris work with the lights from that angle, like watching the rig work is really cool. Like I'm not huge on light shows. I love what Chris does. I'm not huge on the lights. Lights are cool. It's like kind of not my thing. So like I don't mind if I can't see the lights. It's cool to be able to see them. Like at United Center, I was dead on with the lights every night. But yeah, being behind the stage and getting that perspective and having all that energy at you, yeah, it's something that it's like you can't really explain it. You just have to tell someone, just go do it. Like it's really hard to explain.
Set 1.
Well, let's try our best to explain it. So this show, August 1st, 2023, set one opens with Ghost, and not just a ghost, but about a 14 and a half minute long ghost. They are not in any rush. Even though it wasn't the Baker's Dozen, it was still a residency, and it had that feeling that the band came on almost like it feels at a festival. Like they're not in a rush to go anywhere. They're just easing in, and this ghost starts off with I wrote all my notes, there is no rush to get it moving, with a good guitar and keyboard jam just about 5 minutes in, with Fishman being especially active on the snare drum. And it goes all over. There's minor key territory. Page brings in a synthesizer, stuff that I love. And I just wrote that it feels lush and full. They came to play.
I remember this is like the top vivid moment of this show for me was this ghost starting. Like this was like the like this
Starting
was the
high, I have nowhere to go.
Seriously, like the rest of the show like was so fun. It was so up and down. Like there was so many. Like I thought the show flow was great the entire show. But this ghost, like I remember when I still hear it when I listen to the recording, whether it be on Live Phish or on re-listen or whatever I'm listening to. But I think it was like a triangle or some sort of little percussion that Phish hits right before Trey starts just kind of droning that A minor chord. And he like I remember when he started solo doing that A minor chord, I could feel the electricity in the crowd. Like, oh my God, they're starting with Ghost. Like it just started getting louder and louder and louder and louder. And then like that's the first time I've seen Phish in an indoor venue as well. And just hearing, like you said, Phish's like snare and his percussion work like echo throughout MSG was like way different than the sound at Alpine. Not better or worse, just like different. Getting them in an amphitheater is a different sound for sure. But like I could feel the electricity like filling the room when they started this song, and I was like, okay, this is going to be good. And then the first like 5 minutes, I was just like, oh my God, like, and the crowd was so loud, like singing those first lyrics back, and I was like, oh my God, like I haven't been in a crowd this involved in such a long time, for any band of any genre. So that's when I realized, okay, being at a Phish show is a special thing, and being at a Phish show here is a really special thing. So it was the first few minutes, like you said, about this performance that just I was immediately hooked in, and I was like, I'm ready for wherever this is going to take us. And they gave us a long ghost, like you said.
Yeah, I thought that this ghost represents a lot of what 2023 would sound like, did sound like before and would sound like afterward, which is full band, patient playing. It involves everybody, and it's conducive to long jams that have direction and purpose, not just scattered noodling. Like it was really a piece. And it's only the first set opener, and it peaks like crazy at about 14 minutes and 20 seconds right before it ends, which is a real boon when I'm listening to it and I see the timer counting down. I know there's only like a minute or 2 minutes left, but yet we're still all the way at level 11, all the way up there. And then all of a sudden it comes down and they start Reba, which is a great call.
After like towards the end of that ghost, like I remember when they re-entered the just like that chord chug, that A minor chord chug, because they were going a little faster, they had to slow the tempo down from the jam. And once they hit that tempo back to finish off the song, the crowd just went nuts because it was like a perfect re-entry. Just seeing that whole jam, especially Trey's like kind of bliss guitar work towards like the first half of the jam. And then they went into something a little more creative towards the end of it, going back into the song proper. But it was a jam that like hooked me. Like I was like, okay, this is it. Like I need to see this band whenever I can, because like I never felt that way at a Phish show before, was that Ghost. So now because of that, and even before that, like Ghost is like my favorite Phish song like forever. Like nothing can top this song for me. It's so starting with this, like I said, it was a big high for me.
It's
To
funny how you
start the
mentioned
show.
that at Alpine Valley, the first set grabbed you also. And in this show, the first set grabbed you also. Maybe you're a first set guy.
I am, yeah. I love first sets. I like first sets because I remember Alpine Night 2, they opened with 1999 and went into Fluffhead. That was crazy. So that was super fun. Yeah. So I love how they set the tempo for the show, doing that opening Ghost. Like you said, going into Reba. I remember the crowd going nuts when they started this song.
For good reason. And you talk about tempo. The way I thought of it is this Reba is what I call a respectable tempo for 3.0. And it slows down after the vocals and they go into their intricate composed section. But when they get to the jam, it swells here and there. Like Trey goes from melodies that he trades back and forth with Paige at about 9 minutes. You can hear them interacting. They're super comfortable here. And I have to say, it ends with whistling. So a classic Reba after a city destroying Ghost.
Yeah, for sure. And I had another thought about, can I add on, like not only is it just kind of like it's a lot of band interaction, like they're all together, they're all kind of like locked in, like it just felt very tight. Everything felt very well performed, and that's something that I listen for a lot in jam band, which can come to bite me when it comes to Phish, because as we know, not everything is perfect all the time, which is fine. But I'm so picky being a music person that when they can get like a tight, clean performance, it's really cool. And I remember dancing and like singing the hook, the bag it, tag it stuff. With this guy that was next to me, had no idea who he was. I think he was there alone too. And we were just dancing and singing together. And it was really fun. And like I said, it's an impressive piece of music. That composed section that they play. And yeah, it was very tightly performed, very well performed. It's my only Reba I've gotten in 9 shows. I think I'll have a good chance to get it when I'm doing 10 shows straight in a couple weeks.
I hope
But
so.
I hope so. But yeah, it's been my only Reba so far, and 9 shows I've seen them.
And then they go into Funky Bitch, right? Mike's centerpiece, as you described earlier in our conversation. And it's crazy that during a song like Funky Bitch, which is so rocking and so it's like a playground for them, especially for Paige and especially for Trey during their solos. But my thought was, all right, time to take a break, time to get something to drink, time to go to the bathroom, because those first two, Ghost into Reba, really just blew things out of the water.
Yeah, it was nuts getting those 2 songs as the openers. Two really big songs. And like I said, for a lot of people, this might be a break time, whatever. This whole first set, like I didn't move a muscle unless I was dancing. So for me, like my first time getting Funky Bitch, I just really gotten into this cover in like the recent month or two before that, listening to some older shows that they did, and like, oh, this is a fun song. I think I mentioned this later, but going into Alpine, I was still very new to most of their catalog in 2022. I kind of went in pretty blind. I knew a few of their songs, of course, from Joy and a couple other things, but I was like, I'm just going to go live and not worry about songs and just listen. So this is the first time that I had gotten it, or really the only time I had gotten it, where I was really excited that they played it. And it was a really good tempo too. I don't like when they play this too slow or too fast. I mean, that's any song, but they used to play this song super slow, and I much prefer this tempo. It's a little more rocking, a little more fun. The bass line pops a little bit more. I love Mike's bass line. It's very repetitive, of course, like a lot of his bass lines, but it worked perfectly. There was a lot of good interplay between the guys here. So it was like a perfect dancing tempo for me. So I had a blast with this one.
I did too, although I probably was the guy that got up to get something to drink. And when
And
I
that's
got
okay.
back,
That's okay.
right, right. Everyone has different preferences, or at least different rhythms when it comes to a Phish set list. You mentioned earlier that you thought the flow in this show was really, really good. And up next was Timber Ho, which I always like to hear because it's a rarity these days. And when I was first getting into Phish in 1996 and 1997, Timber Ho was still a rarity, but it was also a jam vehicle. It meant big things were coming. When they came back in 2009, they still played it, but it was less of that connotation. They just kind of played the song, maybe had some meandering jams, and then it would end. This one was good, but I think that my expectations are always a little too high. This one got listed on the Phish.net jam charts, though. If you don't mind, I'd just like to read what they said. They described it as stretching out of timber in one of the longest versions the band has played since returning in 2009. It's a great indicator they are feeling comfortable for shows in 2023's MSG residency. The jam stays true to the song while taking a decidedly Allman Brothers band feel. I heard that. I heard the Allman Brothers band influence at about 4 and 6 minutes. Otherwise, it didn't quite fall flat for me, but it wasn't a show highlight either.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's funny that you say that timber is kind of a rarity. I've gotten it twice in 9 shows. I got it in Chicago too. I think that was night one. Oh no, that was night three. Sorry, yeah, that was night three. And like I like the intro groove for this song. But other than that, like I've never been huge on this song. It was my first time hearing it, so there's that. But setlist wise, this was the first like dip for me. It gave me a chance to breathe a bit. I was still involved. I was still engaged. I was dancing. So I was having a good time. And at the time, I had no idea that this was kind of a rarity because I had listened to a bunch of old shows and they had played it a decent amount. I was listening to a lot of like 92, 93, 94 last summer, and they had played it a decent amount. So I was like, okay, timber, great. I didn't realize it was such a rarity at the time.
Well, that's the thing. It's been a rarity starting in like 96, and then in 97 they busted out. I think it was at either Hampton or Winston-Salem. I can't remember exactly, but they busted out this huge version that kind of coronated Timber Ho into, this is a song when it starts, it can go anywhere, but it hasn't in a long time. So that's where my kind of mixed emotions come, or my mixed expectations come, where I'm glad that I'm hearing a rarity, but also I shouldn't get too excited from a musical innovation standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And something else that is very hit or miss for me with this song is sometimes like the chorus vocals, they're really, really high and they're hard to sing. So there's some nights where it just does not sound good.
Yeah.
But I thought this one sounded good overall. This was a really good performance of it, very clean performance. They were feeling good on this night. They were feeling like musically comfortable. They were feeling warmed up, I think, and they were ready to go. They had a day off before this. So yeah, sometimes the vocals can be hit or miss for me on this song, like any song, I guess. But yeah, they hit really good with this one. So I had a good time, even if it wasn't my favorite song of the set.
Next was a song called Broken Into Pieces. It was its live debut. I don't really know anything about it. I haven't re-listened to it except for this show. The category for me of I'm glad it exists, but it's probably better suited to an album. Trey's vocals are strong. We're talking a lot about vocals today. He really comes through with it. Do you know anything about this song other than they played it in the middle of the first set on August 1st, 2023?
Nope.
Okay.
No, it just seems like a random kind of ballad that maybe Trey wrote by himself. I'm not sure how much he's done it with his solo band. I'm not sure if Tab has done it a couple times or not. Maybe, maybe not. But they've only performed it twice. They performed it here and they performed it, I think it was in Ohio, during the fall tour. So I don't really know anything about this song. Like when he started, I was like, what is this? Like I had no idea what was going on. And I was like, I'm like, very possible, just a song I don't know, but it was a song nobody knew.
Right.
Um, but it was, yeah, it was pretty. It was good. I liked some of the harmonies. I found out after the show it was like a debut. I was like, oh, it was a song debut. That's cool. I expected to get more of it in the coming shows, but we've only gotten it once and nothing this year so far with this one. So I don't know, maybe it was just a test run that didn't go very well, or they didn't think it was like, maybe not worth it. Maybe it'll come back eventually. When they first announced the new album, I thought for sure it was gonna be in the new album, but it's not. So
Well, it happens.
yeah.
But they follow it up with a monster version of Wolfman's Brother, 17 minutes. And I know that length doesn't always equal quality, but this Wolfman's Brother, right when they're done with the vocals, they're immediately in space funk territory. And you talk about
Yes.
Mike. I mean, you mostly talked about Mike's vocals earlier in our conversation, but his playing also during Funky Bitch. His funky bass playing at 6 minutes and 45 seconds, although I listened to the audience recording for this show, it doesn't
Sure.
capture it that well, but listening on the soundboard, it just nails it. I love this. And
Yeah,
they quote The Well. I think it's Fishman who starts singing The Well. And
he
then
does.
they switch methods. They kind of go to kind of light and nimble playing at 12 minutes. And I'm glad that they hung on to this groove for a while and they're not automatically going to find something else, because you mentioned the flow in this show. I noticed that the segues weren't that fluid, that the song would kind of end in almost like a car crash or a smooth car crash, I guess. And then Trey would just start up another song.
That did
Well,
happen a couple times in the show for sure.
mhm. But I
Yeah,
will say, though, they did not force it into Wolfman's Brother when they kind of went to the coda for the ending. It was a very organic ending.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and this was a really fun Wolfman's. This is my first Wolfman's too, and I do remember vividly thinking, "Holy shit, Mike is just giving his bass on this song." Even from the top of the song, like when the full beat kicks in, I was sitting behind the stage like, oh my God, Mike's bass is crazy. And I was just dancing like crazy. And it was an absolute like perfect tempo for this song. It was like a perfect groove. Like I said, it goes right into the space funk stuff. And I know you talked about his bass. I know some people don't like his new bass all that much, his Seric bass. I always have. I think it sounds awesome. He was fine tuning it last summer because it was his first time with it. I think it sounds better this year than it did last year, his new bass. I think there's great things about that bass. I think there's great things about his old modulus bass. I think there's great things about his oh God, who's the guy that makes Trace guitars? I forget now.
Oh, Paul Languedoc.
Oh, Languedoc, that's his name. Um, yeah, he had a Languedoc bass at one point in the early '90s. That was cool, a little thin but cool. But like listening back to this one, his tone stands out a lot for a lot of this song. It's really good. It fits perfectly with a very, like I said, a deep space funk jam for a lot of it. And it was really, really fun. And definitely some well quotes from Fishman.
And we're already at the end of the set. I remember thinking at the end of Wolfman's Brother that they were going to end it there. It
Me
just
too.
had that feeling, right? It
Yeah,
was a
me too. I
long
thought the same
jam.
thing. Long jam.
Yeah, I thought it was over. And then we start, I think it's Paige starts, well, Paige and Trey together starts I Am the Walrus. And I remember being thrilled at this performance. I'd seen them play Beatles covers before. I think my most seen Beatles cover is probably While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I've seen them play other songs. And this, I Am the Walrus, I had the thought during this. Number one, the feeling in Madison Square Garden at the time was, it's a cliche, but a huge ball of energy that had nowhere to go.
Yes.
Everyone was freaking out. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, where else are you going to hear this song performed live with this sort of intensity and musicianship?
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
band like U2 could play it, sure, like any band could play it, but Phish is so dialed in and so precise with their sound that it really sounded like, not as if the Beatles were playing it live, but as if a professional band was really, with respect, playing this wild song. And I remember kind of having this out of body experience during I Am the Walrus.
Yeah, there are three songs that, like you just said, there was like an out of body experience kind of feeling. The first one for me was Ghost, as I said. I Am the Walrus was the second one because I remember the crowd, like you said, was just going nuts during this song. And like when Trey started singing that first verse, I was like, oh my God, everybody in this room knows every word to this song. And they were just going crazy. And like I said, I don't think anyone in the room expected them to play this to close that first set. So there was a really cool swerve. It was like the first big shock of the show. I was not expecting this. And just like you, I was thrilled. It was like an absolute party during this song. It was so much fun.
Are you a Beatles fan?
Yeah. I'm really big on like Revolver and the White Album kind of stuff. So listening to that White Album show was fun for me, even if it's not the cleanest thing in the world, but it's fun. um, yeah. I'm big on like early Beatles and then like Revolver and like White Album stuff. I'm actually not huge on Sergeant Pepper, which is like a lot of people say blasphemy, but sorry, it's good. I just think they have better albums like Rubber Soul and White Album and stuff.
Sure. When I start my Beatles podcast and I ask for a controversial Beatles opinion, that's the one you could throw out there.
Oh, for sure. Sounds good to me.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 2.
Set 2 opens with a shocker. You said you were shocked with I Am the Walrus. The shocker isn't necessarily the song that they chose, which is Sample in a Jar, a very obvious set opener. It's kind of the best utility player that is in Phish's canon, that they could play it anywhere, everywhere, kind of like Golgi Apparatus. It could fit anywhere in a show, anywhere in a set list. They open with it. Great, no problem. If you're a little late getting back to your seat, you're not missing anything you haven't heard before. But this version of Sample in a Jar, we've name-checked The Baker's Dozen a few times. This one goes to about 13 or 14 minutes. And that is not literally unprecedented, but it sure feels like it is.
Yeah, having this kind, and this was my first sample as well. So my first sample in a jar was actually I think, is this still the longest one?
Yes, it has to
that's
be.
what I thought. I was like, oh my God, sample, great. It's a great sing along. I did not expect it to jam. There's only been like 5 or 6 times I've jammed this song. And I've actually been at 2 of them because they jammed it out in Chicago as well. They played it for over 10 minutes in Chicago back in the fall. So I've been there for like 2 of the jammed out samples. And this one was great. I think that having this as an opener was really fun. And like you said, it's perfect for everyone to get back to their seats if they've heard it before, nothing crazy. But I don't think anyone expected this long of a jam out of it. And it was really, really great to hear how they jammed it out because I did not expect it because there hadn't been that many. I mean, except for Wolfman, I guess, and Ghost. Nothing crazy in terms of jams. Like Wolfman was just very well performed, and Ghost was a little bit innovative and creative, and they did kind of some weird stuff at the end. But this was like, I don't know, this was a big shocker that they jammed this out to open that second set.
And I have to ask you, since you're a self-described music guy, when I was listening to Sample for like the third or fourth time, just to get it really deep into my head, this song usually ends at around 5 minutes, right? 4.5, 5 minutes.
Yes.
At this point, at 4 minutes, it seems like some band members are really trying to keep it with the traditional ending, and the other band members are trying to keep jamming it. And I can't tell who's trying to do what, but the jamming party wins out.
Yeah,
And so
definitely.
I was wondering if you noticed, did it sound mushy to you at all at that point, like where you would expect the song would end, or did it sound a little more clean?
I would definitely think or I would definitely say that I thought it sounded a little bit more mushy than you would think because like you said, I think they weren't in agreement on where they were going with it. But it just took them a little bit to lock in. And once they locked into, okay, we're going to keep going with this, it's just a killer jam. But it was definitely a little bit of it was kind of a stumble to get to the jam because, like I said, it's so rare that they do that. Maybe they just were, some members were just not expecting it or wasn't. I mean, obviously, they don't really talk about it much ahead of time, but it wasn't like a situation where, oh, well, we said we're going to jam this out before we walked out or whatever, or however they build their set lists. So yeah, I did notice that it took a couple bars, a few measures, kind of lock in what was going on. And once they were all on the same page of, oh, we're going to keep going, then it really locked in and really, really fun jam.
The next song is Kill Devil Falls, which my thinking, both in the moment and now re-listening to it, is sure, great, but my head is still back in Sample in a Jar.
Yeah.
It really is. It took me
Yeah.
a while to process and then maybe even get over it, but I just couldn't get my head out of that space. Although this is not an unremarkable Kill Devil Falls. Like toward the end, Page takes over on piano. There's like a little honky tonk section. Trey takes the band back to the end, although it's unfinished. This is what we were talking about earlier, that there is this kind of not quite a ripcord, but kind of a mishmash where they unevenly blend into Golden Age.
Yeah, it's getting into Kid Level Falls, like you said, it just kind of came out of nowhere. And I noticed
Yeah.
that live too. Wait, what's happening right now? I was like, oh, he just started the Kill Devil Falls line. I was not expecting that. Like I could like that sample jam could have gone on for 5 more minutes and I would have been happy. Like they could have just kept going. I had such mixed feelings about the fact that they left that jam to go into Kill Devil Falls because I wanted to hear more of that jam. But this song, Kill Devil Falls, is the one that really piqued my interest when I was in high school because Joy had just come out. And I had some
Right.
friends that were really into it. So I bought the CD, never heard Phish ever. But this was like the song that hooked me on that album. I really liked this song. I thought it was catchy and fun. And I loved this song during I had like a 1 month Phish phase. And I mean literally I listened to only this album. I listened to just Joy. And I didn't realize until years later that they had just come back from not being a band and that Trey went through all the stuff he went through. I had no idea that was the case until about 5 years ago. Because I didn't really pay attention to the behind the scenes and personal stories until recently. So the song has like a soft spot in my heart because I was like, okay, this is the song that hooked me, quote unquote, or kind of got my interest when I was in high school. So it was cool to hear this live, even if it was kind of an awkward start out of that sample jam.
Yeah, it's again, it's not unremarkable, but if I were making a mix of like best of the 7 show run, it
Oh,
probably wouldn't make it.
no, it definitely wouldn't make it on the list.
Right,
Definitely
unless you're
wouldn't.
doing only page highlights, because I did like I said, his piano playing at the end. And when they get into Golden Age, similar feeling where it has kind of that Baker's Dozen vibe where it's very spacious, it's very laid back, it's not slow. I don't mean that, but there's not really much of there's not a lot of urgency. Like we'll be back soon, so no need to rush a peak.
Sure.
There is a distinct turn though at 7 minutes to a minor key where Page comes in with his synthesizer again, and I'm automatically sold whenever that happens. And I'm not alone because you could hear the whole audience react. Trey gets on the wah-wah and this is the only time I've used this word, I think, for the whole show, and maybe even in this whole podcast, but I wrote that things get a little crispy at 11 minutes, 15 seconds. But it's not just a build into a peak. It's like everything just kind of slowly rises like a low-grade hill to a plateau, and then ending soon thereafter.
Yeah, for sure. And this was the second time I had gotten Golden Age. And the first time I got it, I didn't know what to expect because I was going in relatively blind to that Alpine show and they played it. I think it was the second night they played it. So going into that weekend, I went in pretty blind. But this time I expected it and I was like, oh, that'd be cool if they played Golden Age again because I really like that cover now. And then they did. And this was actually one of the tighter versions I've heard in recent years. Sometimes this song doesn't always hit nowadays. Sometimes like the instrumentation can be kind of awkward together and they're not
I
always in the same
agree.
tempo. Yeah, it sounds really awkward sometimes, and the vocals are really high, and sometimes Trey can't get there, and it's just awkward. So I was happy to get a really solidly performed one. It's a really clean performance of this song by today's standards for sure.
I agree because I was there when they debuted it. I think it was in Albany in 2009, and it was unlike anything Phish had played before. Even the rhythm of it, the
Yeah,
like that doesn't sound like Phish. And of
no,
course, it's not written by Phish, but even their covers, it's out of their comfort zone. And it was very exciting. They played killer versions. They have played killer versions throughout. It's been over 10 years, almost 15 years since they've been back, right?
yeah.
It's been about 15 years since they've been back. And so it's always exciting when they start it up, but I agree with you that it sounds like they've bit off a little more than they could chew at
Yeah, sometimes it
times.
gets a little messy.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, I I was happy to get a very clean performance because like when I come back to the show, this is always a highlight because I they lock into the groove like perfectly and it was like a perfect dancing tempo. So I was really happy about how they played it. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, and it melts into Shade, which is one of my favorite. I wrote when I wrote my notes, I wrote one of my favorite newer songs, and then something just stopped me in my head from writing any more. I had to go back and just make sure and check its debut. It's been around for 9 years. It's not really a newer song, but it is one of my favorites, and it played kind of the same role as Funky Bitch did in set one, where it's all right, time to sit down if you need to, time to relax, get your breather in.
Yeah, this is like a perfect spot for a breather too after the set openers because there's a lot of fast-paced stuff, a lot of jam heavy stuff. And this is like my easily my favorite like modern Phish ballad. It's such a simple and very pretty song. And I'd only just recently heard the song for the first time before like seeing it live. So like it was on my mind when I went to the show, like, oh, it'd be cool if they played Shade, similar to Golden Age. And I was like, and then they played it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's great. It was a great little breather, but I was also really moved by the performance because it didn't overstay its welcome. It was just very well performed. Trey sounded very nice. It was just very pretty. So it was a nice little breather, and I couldn't have asked for a better breather than like my favorite like ballad that they do nowadays. So I was really happy about that.
And then it's a complete change in tone in terms of set list and the tone in the room, even when they start up Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley, because it's always been a crowd favorite. It's one of the oldest covers that they play, but we're now deep in the second set. Everything is set up for a big jam. And if not a big jam, because you don't want to put those expectations on it, maybe just a fun dance party. And Sneakin' Sally really served its purpose there.
Yeah, it was a very good dance tempo. I
Yeah.
keep saying dance tempo today, but it was like perfect. It was just like Wolfman's. Fish and Mike just kind of locked into a perfect groove, and then Trey and Page can play off of that, of course. But this is a huge highlight for me. I keep mentioning how I was listening to a lot of older shows last summer. I was kind of starting their early years. Like I basically listened to all their performances from like 89 through 94 for like 2 months straight. It's like all I listened to last summer. And they played this cover a decent amount.
Yeah.
So I knew what it was going into the MSG show. Didn't expect to get it. So like I said, when they played it, the crowd, they really perked the crowd up. Like they were like, oh my God, they're doing Sneak and Sally. And just Trey very subtly playing that intro riff. You can kind of hear him strumming it a bit, and then he goes into it, gets louder, and then everyone else joins him. And yeah, the crowd went nuts. It was a huge highlight. The crowd was having so much fun. Every time I go to a show, I like since I've gone to shows since this one, I was hoping they would play it again. I was hoping we would get it in Chicago, but we did not. So I'm hoping to get it this summer again because I love getting this song live. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it's always good to hear. And you use the phrase right, dance tempo or dance party. I wrote like steady rhythm when I was listening to it, and
Yeah,
added to it, the crowd always goes crazy for it, no matter where you are, but especially at Madison Square Garden, because you said you were listening to those early to mid Phish 1.0 shows from like 89 to 94, and they stopped playing it at a certain time, and then they brought it back on December 30th, 1997, and it was a huge bust out, and they were right at the end of their cowfunk era, and so it really just set a certain standard for Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley at Madison Square Garden. You know, it's unfair to look at it that way because they're not going to play it that way every single time, but the crowd collectively remembers when that happens. So it's a big deal where Phish kind of has that blessing and curse mixed together, where every time they play any song, it's measured up not only on its own merits at the time it's being played, but against every time it's been played before. So
for sure.
that's Sneaking Sally Through the Alley kind of carries that weight, at least in my mind and my experience from its bust out in 97. And man, that was a good time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's a few songs like under that category, and I just think it's. I haven't met a single person at a Phish show where I mention, oh, I hope they play this song, that they're not like, oh, that'd be great. Like I think everyone loves when they play this song. Like I've never met a single person that doesn't like when they play this song.
Yeah,
So it's great to get it at any time in any era. It's always fun.
yep, definition of a crowd favorite. Although it is kind of a little bit of a weird, awkward transition into Twist at the end. It was good, like kind of similar to some of the previous songs that we listed and discussed. Twist, there's a quiet jam that starts around 2 minutes, and nothing I haven't heard before, nothing innovative, just another version of Twist, kind of standard, before they wrap up the set with You Enjoy Myself, a classic set two closer.
Yeah, it was a very standard twist, like you said. Like there's nothing super special about it. Well performed. It was fine. I wrote down that the one thing I was prepared for this time though was the woos. So Twist actually has a weird kind of place in my heart. I really like this song because when I was at Alpine and they played the song, never heard it before because I was new to the catalog, and the entire crowd did the woo, and I was like the one guy that was like, "What?" Like I had no idea what they just did. Like the audience is involved. That was when I first realized how involved the audience was in Phish shows, was when they played Twist at Alpine in 2022. So then I was like, okay, and then I did the rest of the woos for the rest of the song because I knew when they were coming. I could kind of tell. So now I was prepared, and that was kind of the first time I ever realized, oh, they have a lot of audience stuff that happens. I kind of knew about that because of various like stash performances when everyone claps, but I had never heard twists before when I first went into that Alpine show. So getting in at this show specifically was fun because I knew that the woos were coming and I could do them without missing a beat. So that was a highlight, even if it was a standard performance.
Right. And I thought You Enjoy Myself was kind of standard as well, except toward the end with the drums and bass part at around 11 minutes.
Yeah.
The only other thing I noticed that's different from other versions that I've heard is that Trey focused a little bit more on rhythm guitar as opposed to soloing for a little bit. But other than that, standard You Enjoy Myself in addition to the standard twist, which is a good way to end a show. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And I liked hearing this. You Enjoy Myself, my first one. Still haven't gotten it since. Similar to Reba, I've gotten one, and it was on this show, and I haven't heard it since. I didn't have an appreciation for this song when I heard it like I do now, and I feel silly about that. So I hope I hear it again because still my only You Enjoy Myself to date, and now I'm so in tune with what they're doing in the composition and kind of how the jam structure works with the song and how the ending vocal jam can work that I'm so more in tune with it nowadays than I was even on August 1st, less than a year ago. That I would love to get it or I guess in the coming like 3 weeks. God, I see them next Friday. So in the coming weeks, I would love to hear this one again because great closer. And I always love the drop when they go into the words when they say boy and all that stuff. It's always fun to hear the whole crowd just scream that. So it was fun to get this as the closer.
For sure. And the encore for this show is pretty exceptional, I have to say. It's a 4-song encore, and it opens. This was probably my favorite part with Wilson, because Wilson, to me, when I was getting into Phish, is very much a show opener. Right? It's the way to get the crowd into it. You mentioned the crowd interaction, the chant. It opens on one of the discs on a live one. It's still constantly an opener. But now it's in the encore spot for this show, and it almost is a psyop that it kind of keeps us, the audience, mentally fooled to think, oh, we're at the beginning of the show. It keeps the energy up to that degree that even though we're obviously at the end of the show, it feels like the beginning because they're playing a song that we are conditioned to believe opens the show. It was an interesting little feeling when they played it.
It really was. And when they started it, like you said, weird spot for it. Not a bad spot, just a different spot. And nobody expected it. So I think like it really perked the crowd up. They're like, whoa, what? We're playing Wilson in the encore? Yeah. So yeah, I think this might have been a sign that like maybe we're in for a little bit more than just a standard encore, and then they definitely gave us more than a standard encore. So maybe they were just feeling it from the crowd that night, and they were like, "Let's do something fun for the encore," because they almost played 30 minutes for this encore.
Yeah, they did.
But so having this as the opener perked everyone up and went, "Oh, this could go somewhere different," and it definitely did.
It did, because after Wilson is Sanity, which is fun and unexpected. I mean, Trey is talking through the lyrics on this one much more than usual. They even play a few rhythm games with each other, or Trey and Fishman do, instead of just those two players do. Although the boom pow kind of falls a little flat in the middle, but it's funny because it's a silly little song that also heralds all the way back to Junta, which I also love. After that, they close it with Bowie and Character Zero. You can't complain. If you are complaining, you were at the wrong show.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree because Character Zero, and actually this Sanity, actually, I'll go back to Sanity for a second. It was a big shock hearing this one. I know a lot of people that chase this song nowadays. Like I've never seen it live. And so I'm glad I got it early on in my show attendance. And this was my first ever Bowie as well. Then I expected like a mid encore. I thought this was going to close the show.
Yeah.
I thought they're going to play Bowie and then end it. So I did not expect it to be like a mid encore song when they went into Character Zero. And this was the Character Zero. This was like my third like out of body thing in the closing part. I have a video of it on my phone too, from behind the stage, like watching the rig work during the closing parts where Trey is singing super high with Paige. Everyone's singing really high, and the crowd is doing the ba ba ba, all that stuff. the crowd was just going insane during that part. And getting all that energy just like coming at me was just so insane. It was so loud and it was so much fun. It was just an absolute party. It was similar to like Walrus, I would say, in terms of the energy. I consider I and the Walrus and Character Zero the two like high points in terms of like the crowd just throwing energy at the stage. And like when this song closed, like when they finished Character Zero and they walked off stage, I was just like standing. I was like, what was that? Like that was crazy. Like it was my first time at MSG, and I was just in awe at how fun it was and how I was like, I need to experience this again and have a similar vibe. I'll kind of take it off topic for like a second here. A couple weeks ago, I saw Dave Matthews Band at SPAC for the first time. I had never been to SPAC before, ever. And if I ever go back to SPAC, I never want to be anywhere except that balcony, because the SPAC balcony, I have not been in a crowd that loud since this Phish show, since this MSG show, because that crowd was going insane for Dave Matthews Band the entire night in that balcony. And it was just a party. And it was basically the feeling I had during this Character Zero was that balcony the entire weekend, a couple weekends ago at SPAC. So all that kind of bubbles up into this performance of this song where it's like everything was just like perfect. It was a party. Everyone was into it. I was having a blast. The lighting ring was going nuts, and it was just so much fun.
Well, Lucas, thank you so much for coming on Attendance Bias today, for taking your time and just explaining what hooked you. Even though you had seen Phish before, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe those first Alpine shows didn't absorb you in the way that this August 1st, 2023 at Madison Square Garden show did. So it's really a wonderful thing. And I appreciate it so much that you were able to share not just why it did, but also really pinpoint different moments throughout the show that hooked you. And that's kind of what this podcast is all about. So thank you so much for taking the time and telling your story.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great time to talk about it. I love revisiting this show. If people always say if there's one Phish show from recent years you can recommend, it's always this one, even though there's a lot of different shows I could recommend. It's always this one just because of my personal feelings for it.
And that's it for today's conversation with Lucas Jordan about August 1st, 2023 at MSG. Since this show was fairly recent, and since Lucas is a fairly new fan, today's fact check isn't that long or detailed. Just the same, we got to make sure we got it all.
Attendance bias fact check.
First, as Lucas and I spoke about Chicago area venues, the United Center has a capacity of 23,500 and the Alpine Valley shows that Lucas was looking forward to at the time of this recording were on July 26th, 27th, and 28th, 2024. By the time this episode airs, he will have attended 3 more shows. Lucas points to Funky Bitch as an example of some of Mike's finest singing. More specifically, he mentions the version from December 28th, 2023. So check out the beginning of last year's New Year's Eve run if you want to hear Mike's vocals at their best. The standout version of Mike's song played at this 7-show 2023 run that Lucas enjoyed was played on August 4th, 2023, which was the 6th show out of the 7. On Phish.net, this Mike song is described as, quote, almost exactly 6 years to the day, Mike's gets another monster run as the Set 2 opener at MSG after August 2nd, 2017's Baker's Dozen Stunner. After a spirited, if routine first jam, the second jam forges ahead at 8 minutes and 45 seconds with a progressively upbeat display of the band's ability to weave a tapestry of interplay as they cycle through the changes. Trey's walk-up at 19 minutes and 20 seconds signals a blowout finale on the horizon, which arrives in full a few minutes later, after which the closing chords are repeated and then a segue into Sand. They really have a way with words over there at Phish.net. I have to call out myself for calling Timberhoe a rarity several times in today's conversation. Checking Phish.net, the old-time cover was played 4 times in 2023, twice in 2022, and twice in 2021. So although it's not a regular in the rotation, it's also not crazy to see it pop up in a set list a couple of times per year. In addition, the version from 1997 with the big jam that I referred to was not at Hampton or at Winston-Salem. It was at the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio, during the legendary December 7th, 97 show. Speaking of the Nutter Center, Broken Into Pieces was debuted by the Trey Anastasio Band Trio in Denver earlier in 2023, but after the debut at today's show on August 1st, it's only been played once more to date. You know where? at the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio, during the Phish Fall Tour in 2023. And that's it for today's episode of Attendance Bias. I'd like to thank Lucas Jordan for joining me today, Phish.net for providing all the information for today's fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything it does to support music education, and Phish.in for the great sounding recording of today's show. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You can leave a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You could go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can financially, or you could just spread the word, tell someone who you think would enjoy the show about it. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.